to talk to us about how there is an intersection between civic life and our Christian values and our responsibility to others. If we look at the ministry of Jesus, who was it that he was always for?
The poor, the oppressed.
Yes. And so as we think about that, Emily?
Okay. Ready? You remember that song, Red and Yellow, Black and White?
They are
all
precious in our sight.
Jesus
Loves the little children of the world.
Does he love the big people too?
No.
The emerald.
But we grew up and we quit singing about it. I'm from East Tennessee and we had a very low number of African Americans there. I knew the janitor at my mother's office and so forth, but they didn't go to school with us, of course. And so it was new for me to have black friends and so forth. But fortunately, my mama taught me differently. And her best friend at work was an African American janitor, I remember. But I married and moved around and saw that elsewhere black people were more often mistreated. From Texas to DC, I saw that you can find prejudice from the office to the church's pews. It's much quieter now, but it still tiptoes around. The fireball of racism landed at my feet when I left city life to start a newspaper in a small town called Edgefield, South Carolina. Anybody ever heard of that?
Say it again.
Edgefield, South Carolina.
What's it near?
Not much. North Augusta.
Above
Okay.
Aiken,
Oh, yeah.
above
Okay,
yeah.
Augusta.
Okay.
I used to live in Augusta.
Okay. And Strom Thurmond's hometown, you should know that.
Oh, interesting.
Definitely celebrate that.
Boy, that was a challenge.
No, you just tried to ignore it. But that's where I really learned about racism. It had good schools and good jobs and some old money. And Senator Thurmond as his native son and a lot of fine people. They really were. Good Christian people. But it was scary at times and hurtful for me to see the white reactions from the people I loved. Readers knew where I stood, read the editorials I wrote, but I remember being scared for my safety only once. Finally, a black Miss Strom Thurmond High was named, and that was big. I was so proud that I could run her picture on the front page, and that it was that she'd been elected, chosen. But now I'm moving along peacefully, seldom disturbed about race for some time now, until a few days ago when the U.S. Supreme Court, concluded that race could be a factor to be considered for admission to, say, Mars Hill University or other state universities. All are loved and valued alma maters. So I got mad. I got really mad because I'd seen so much at Strom Thurmond High and on through the years. And I thought I could trust to behave like Americans, do the right thing. That's why I wanted to sit here and hear from you this morning and your stories of how racism, what racism you've seen or how it's affected your life. And how did you think and feel when you saw racism?
Well, I grew up in Memphis,
You have good stories, I'm sure.
and I was there when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I saw the upheaval that resulted from all of that. And it wasn't the conflicts that upset me, it was the hatred. And Memphis had so much racial hatred the whole time I was growing up, I remember there was just so much hatred. There was one of the largest black communities in the United States. Confluent black community. It was called Orange Mound.
Orange Mountain?
Orange Mound.
Mound. Uh-huh.
And it was a very large black community. And growing up, I went through there all the time. I never thought about it. We didn't live far from there. And I walked in that area.
And a lot of blacks live there, is that what you're saying?
Not right where I lived. My community was
around Orange.
white blue collar worker community. But there were a lot of blacks who walked up and down the street down below us that we turned off of was Summer Avenue. And Summer Avenue was one of the streets that circumvented the Memphis area. So it went all around. It joined Parkway North and then Parkway East and Parkway South and then back up, all the way around the downtown area. So I would ride the bus that way a lot. But I know somebody mentioned Goldsmiths last week.
Me.
And yeah.
That's where my dog came from.
Yeah.
Goldsmiths.
Right. But we would go to Goldsmiths to shop. And I would go down there with my friends and we would have lunch in the tea room just to splurge. But, and it was also close to the zoo. And I never had a problem with black people. I had a problem with white people.
Was Goldsmith black or white or?
It's a department store.
It's a department
Mainly
store.
White people shop
Yeah.
there.
Mostly white. I
Mostly
never
white.
saw any blacks in there. Of course, we had the signs, no blacks admitted, no coloreds, is what it would say, in different places, and especially the restrooms. But I
I'm sure
was
saw that,
never
but I don't remember it.
taught that. I remember my dad lecturing me one time on people. He said, you have good people and you have bad people. It has nothing to do with color. He said, you have bad white people and you have good white people. And he didn't use he used the term, which was the term at that time. He said, you have good Negroes, and then he used another word that I won't say for bad colors. And my mother talked about growing up with blacks close by her, and she had a friend that she would play with a lot of time who was black, and she would always tease her friend about, at the time there was a lot of different types of dances and everything, and at the time she told her friend that she bet she was really good at dancing the black bottom. And my mother loved to tell that story because she and her friend would just holler and laugh about it.
Well, it was a big dance.
It was.
It was a popular dance.
Right. And she probably was good at it. But anyway, and I don't mean that as being typecasting, but one time I was a tomboy, believe it or not, and I loved to play outside. And I played in the gutters, the street gutters, when it would rain, and we would float different things down the street. But one day I was out playing. I was kind of down the street from our house, and this little black boy came up, and he said, "Could I play with you?" And I said, "Sure, just get you something to float, and we'll have a race and see who wins." And we sat there and we just played and played and played. Well, unbeknownst to me, somebody got up on the roof of our house and took a picture of us playing together.
You have that.
And I have that picture. And that's the way I was raised, which was a very difficult thing to do in that city that was so torn by racial
But
dislocation.
you didn't know the difference in that moment.
I never really knew the difference. I had friends from I had friends from all over. I worked at St. Jude, and it had international people coming there, and I met people from all over the world, and I loved it. I loved finding out about the different people and all. And it's funny because right now I have some young men from India who are students at Virginia Tech who are staying with me, and they're going around this area hiking. And I can hardly understand them, but I enjoy meeting people from all over. And all of us were that way. And I think that's what is lacking now is, one of my favorite songs, You've Got to Be Taught.
Yeah.
To love it,
That has been going around in my head since we started. You've got to be carefully taught.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
To be afraid first.
Yes.
And I think fear is often the part that comes first. To be afraid.
I think that's important in terms of you've got to be taught. Like I think about the innocence of children, and if you put young children together, regardless of color or anything of that nature, they play, they smile, they laugh. I mean, I can remember as a child the first time I experienced racism in the late 80s, maybe even early 90s. I was 4, maybe 5 years old. And I remember there was a gentleman, my grandfather had tractors, and he had disc and things of that nature for quite a bit of farmland there. And there was a guy who would always come and borrow his tractor, and oftentimes my grandfather would be gone. My grandmother had died, and my mother cleaned my grandfather's house and kept it up for him, and when we were kids, we would be there. And this guy would always come to the back door, and he would just let us know what he was doing. He was going to borrow the tractor, he was going to borrow the disc, and he'd have it back by this time just to let my grandfather know. Well, finally one day, my mother was vacuuming, didn't hear the door, so I went to the door, and he was at the back door, and I said, come in. He's like, no, I can't come in. I said, yes, you can come in this house, walk up those steps, and come in. He's like, I can't come in this house. And I said, I'm inviting you in, come in. And he said, I can't come in a white person's house. And I think I probably even asked him why, because I was at that age. And I said, well, next time you come to this house, the front door is closer. You need to come to the front door, and you are invited in this house. And he said, you just don't understand. You can't come in. I can't come in this house. And I said, I know my grandfather. I know this family. You can come in this house if you want to come in this house. But it stung me as a 4 or 5 year old kid that someone, because of their race, would not have been allowed in someone's house and would have to use the back. I mean, I remember being taught as a kid growing up in that area of the South, you could go to the back door if you really knew someone, but if you didn't know them, or if it was your first time going to the house, or if it was something formal, you used the front door. You rarely used the back door. But then that was when I learned that if you were a person of color, that you were expected to go around to the back door and not use the front door.
How long ago?
That was late 80s, early 90s.
Somebody else have a story?
My story is a little different than Margaret's. I grew up south of Memphis, and the situation I'm sure was similar, but I lived in a rural area, little bitty town called Ackerman, Mississippi, and it was I lived on the resort of Choctaw Lake, which was a conservation property between Choctaw County and Winston County, where Louisville is. So there was a lake, a lodge, swimming area, boating. There were camps there for the summertime for 4-H'ers and other campers. There was a big pavilion that went out over the lake that was fabulous for dancing. I loved to dance. I grew up where blacks were totally separate. In my little town and in the town in Louisville, both of them had what back in that day was called the in-town. And the colored people all lived in that area only. They weren't interspersed among the whites at all. Their school was in their area of town. In my town of Ackerman, there were absolutely no blacks around except the help. We had help every day. I had a retarded brother, and my mother needed the assistance, and so we had a black lady came every day, and I knew no hatred at all, but I also knew there were boundaries. I grew up knowing she did not eat at the table with us. She was there during lunch, and she ate after we ate lunch. She ate lunch.
Expect to eat at the table.
No. Yeah, that just, it was like what Heath was saying. That just wasn't done. They did not go to school with us. I never saw a black person in a store. I never saw, we only had one little cafe type restaurant out on the highway where when I grew up, all the teenagers hung out, called the Circle Inn. There weren't any blacks ever eating there. I never saw a black person in a restaurant until I moved up here. And it was shocking the first time. I remember telling my husband at the time, I was already grown and married and had babies, and I said, this is the first time I've ever seen a black person in a restaurant eating at a table being served. And I said, I wasn't opposed to it. It was just an unusual thing. If any of you have seen the movie or read the book, The Help,
Oh, yes.
I grew up in that era. I lived in Jackson. We moved from Little Ackerman after I went all the way through from first grade to the middle of the 11th grade, and due to a political thing which I won't go into, we moved to the capital. I hated it in Jackson. Jackson was more like Memphis, and that's when I realized, whoa, we have a problem. And
Did you consider it a problem then?
not a serious problem. And I'm sure, according to movies and things, books and all that I have read, there was stuff going on all of my life. You see, I was born in 43.
It was under.
But I never knew about Mississippi burning. I never knew about
All the
lynchings and things like that. And my daddy had a black man that was, he was a wonderful person who worked for him, and his name was Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln something, and I don't know what his last name was, but we called him Big Abe. Big Abe was fabulous. He was such a strength for my daddy. I never knew about hatred of blacks at all. We loved the lady that she was a young girl who worked in my home. Her name was Beth Elaine, and she ended up having a little girl. She named her after me. Then she had a little boy. She named the little boy after my brother. Beth Elaine was a part of the family. And it never dawned on me about her not eating at the table with us because it just wasn't done. And when you would go out in Jackson, there were colored only bathrooms and water fountains and white
The
only.
scary part is that we don't notice.
Yeah, yeah. See, I wasn't taught the hatred. I was just taught this is the way it is. And when I first started realizing the big difference, and his story reminded me of this, every summer I went to Selma, Alabama to visit my cousins. And I would stay 2 weeks. And one of the things that's most memorable about those trips, it was hot summertime. We didn't have air conditioning. We just had fans blowing all over the house, you know, circulating the air, but it was hot. So the windows were open. The shutters were closed, but the windows were open. But I can remember in the early morning hearing these sounds. Green beans, tomatoes, fresh corn, different vendors. They were all black, were coming down the street, and they would sing what they were selling.
Okay.
And this was every morning during the week. Now on Sundays they didn't come. You didn't expect them, and I don't even remember them coming on Saturday, but they may have.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay.
So we can hear why we're talking about this. As you all know, but I'm going to let Wiley talk about the ruling of this week.
And this is going to be short, but I want to set up a dichotomy. First, the Supreme Court of the United States. I think all of us basically are in agreement in terms of inclusion of everyone. Everyone in this room, I know you too well. So, the Supreme Court has basically said that a school, a college or university, cannot use race as a factor in admissions. That basically was the ruling. And Justice Roberts said something that I've already heard in the classroom today. The student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. He goes on to say that it is unconstitutional to judge a person's worthiness to enter college using race as a factor. That reverses 45 years of precedent, which said that because you set up the starting line so that other than black people had to start back here, and up here, and black people had to start here with the same finish line. And so it is necessary and confirmed by the court 45 years ago and repeated that it's necessary to say because you had these experiences that kept you from believing you could go in the front door, because your family doesn't have the money that the average white family, even my white family, had, we are going to encourage schools to take that as a factor, not the factor. Now, you have in front of you the statement of the United Methodist Church in response to this rule. Oh, what about, think about this, what about Robert's statement? The student must be treated based on his or her experience as an individual, not on the basis of race. Would you disagree with?
Absolutely.
Wait
Look
a
at all
minute.
of the athletes. That's
Not
right.
only that, legacies still can be given favoritism.
Mhm.
Now, here's what, I'm going to give you 2 sentences or 3 sentences from the Methodist, your church's statement. The United Methodist Church sees the most fundamental premise underlying the concept of affirmative action is both moral and spiritual. According to biblical teaching, we are mandated in the face of inhumane discrimination, whether that discrimination is intended or unintended, to do what we can to redress legitimate grievances and to create a society in which the lives of any and all may flourish. We continue to believe, given the tenacity of many forms of racism, sexism, and ableism, both blatant and subtle, the concept of affirmative action retains its relevance as part of an overall effort to create a more just and equitable social system, and we will continue to reflect in our own practices and champion to the wider world the kingdom values. Notice the kingdom values that seek to ensure access to and effective participation in all sectors of society for people of color, women, and persons with disabilities. Now, what would Roberts say to that? I'm just posing for thought. And why would you, how would you see the decision in light of both of these statements?
I think unintended is the key word in that first statement, because it's a maybe unintended policy. He's masking the policy.
Connie's family didn't intend,
I think,
but they assumed that black people either could not or should not have access to the same kind of level of life that white people did.
well, Thomas is on the Supreme Court. I think you can make a very clear argument because representation matters.
Mhm.
Yes, yes.
Connie Bryant and Thomas rode the escalator of affirmative action all the way to the top and got there and destroyed the components of it so that no one else can get to where they are. It was on the basis of somewhat of affirmative action that I got into the university that I did, because admissions counselors, when they looked at applications for a top-tier public institution, didn't just say, we're only going to take those who have SAT scores of this and we're going to take those who have GPAs of this. They said, we're going to consider this person, what did they take the harder courses that school offered? Maybe you went to a poor high school. I certainly did. And maybe they didn't offer all AP courses. Maybe they didn't offer the SAT prep courses that schools in Asheville and Chapel Hill and Raleigh and others did. And so we're going to take that into consideration so that we can have rich diversity in who we're representing as a public institution, which just so happened to be one of the institutions, Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill were two of the institutions represented in this case that brought this up. But they took that into consideration. And had it not been for taking into full consideration a person's experience and what they had access to and what they didn't have access to, my life would be vastly different today.
To back up what you say, let me read the dissent by Justice Sotomayor, who is the only Latina justice in the court. Quote, "It is a disturbing feature of today's decision that the court does not even attempt to make the extraordinary showing required to reverse precedent. Equal educational opportunity is a requisite to achieving racial equality in our nation," she wrote, joined by Jackson and Justice Kagan. "Today, this court stands in the way and rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress." Now, I'm going to say one more thing from my point of view. I graduated from Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina, a very good, I guess you would say, second tier school.
Methods.
The first black student in this Methodist college that attended this Methodist college attended the year after I graduated in 1965.
Late to the party.
Emily and I are funding a small scholarship focused on black students and especially students at Eau Claire High School, which is a high black, high poverty high school in Columbia, South Carolina. It took many years outside of the football team, of course. It took many years before Wofford, a Methodist school, really began to assertively recruit black students.
You wanted to say something.
Yeah. So my point is that, but it was okay for the college to consider the fact that my son Peter give my son Peter a check mark, just one out of 20, but one check mark because I was a graduate of Wofford. Very, very un-Methodist in some ways. Okay, I'm through.
I wanted to expound on the point I made because when I was going to college, the only blacks I saw on campus were athletes. And it angered me that they were given the privilege of coming to the university based on their athletic prowess, which raised money for the programs for the college. So
the-
they were being exploited,
So the
basically.
privilege was not theirs, it was the college.
Right.
Privilege what?
Exactly, my point.
What you said?
Yeah,
They didn't get the privilege of an education, the college got the privilege of their labor.
Right, exactly.
And those of us who have been instructors know that their chosen majors were very carefully crafted.
oh, very.
And the instructors were advised to not fail those students and to give them all the extra help that they could get in order to pass.
Yeah.
the
So
Yeah,
they
I
could
was
make a
paid to
touchdown.
to tutor athletes.
Or give them exceptional
Yeah, oh, the
advantages.
college paid me,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Oh,
Bob became an academic advisor when he was an assistant football coach for many years. He was the academic advisor to those football players who were leaving on the night train regularly to try to, and he was trying to let them know, you know, we appreciate your ability on this field, but you've got to cut the mustard in the classroom, you know. And so that,
I have a question. Why do you think this is happening now? Why do you think they're basically dismantling the Warren Court? I mean, what?
Her
Why?
emails.
What'd you say?
Her emails. 2016.
the same
You think?
I noticed in Pickens, South Carolina, not far from the North Carolina line, 15,000 people gathered in a 3,600 person town to hear Mr. Trump speak yesterday.
I saw that on the TV last
Now.
night.
Do you think it's a?
I think the reaction to progress, especially when people fear progress, always comes, and it's virulent.
Why do you think there's this fear, though? It's
It's
something
the
that
zero, it's the
Zero
zero
sum
sum game. And we have not done a good job selling what we are doing and
As a
showing
church,
as a church
People.
or as a country. What had been at least attempted was to make a more equal.
I think the goal was zero racism. We want, and I think once Obama got elected, hey, look at that.
Yeah.
Racism's over. It's done. But I think what we should have been focusing on is anti-racism.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Good point. Good
Let
point.
me add one thing from my Greenville experience where I grew up. There were and still are two big, major historical high schools in Greenville, Greenville and Parker. Parker was where all the mill kids went. Greenville was where the non-mill kids went, and the lines were drawn very interestingly. Those kids grew up to have jobs, the Parker kids grew up to have jobs in the textile industry. The textile industry in our area died. They lost their jobs, and they were told, what? The blacks took your jobs. The blacks took your opportunity. The blacks, even though you got an inferior education, you are above them. Now you are above nobody, and you should be angry. That's where a lot of this comes. Our Southern whites who were discriminated against. When I went to work for an organization in Washington, D.C., it took up 6 months of hard work on my part for them to figure out that I didn't think as slowly as I talk. If you feel that you are discriminated against and you are low on whatever totem pole, you are afraid of having the little you have taken away.
I mean, it's almost as though we discriminate against people who are beneath us. Imagine that.
And
But we
that's
have
true of the Hispanics as well.
Yeah, sure.
We have master manipulators who are putting this into place to make us believe that. There's a really good political cartoon about don't let that person take your cookie, when the person who's saying that, former president, one of them, has a plate of cookies in front of them, and there's only 2 cookies over here between perhaps a black person and or Hispanic/Latino person and a white person.
And they're getting
And it just, I mean, I think about, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago to a couple of people. I see sometimes at Ingalls, there's a flag on a truck that says Joe and the whatever rhymes with Joe have to go. And I think about why that is when you take Kamala Harris, who has been married once, and you take the prior opponent to that ticket, who's been married 3 times, and on the current marriage had unprotected sex with a prostitute, and we're using that word while his wife was 6 months pregnant at the time, and we're using that word to describe her because of the color of her skin and the fact that she is a woman.
and a known defamer of women now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna just switch gears a little bit.
I can't talk.
As a church, where are we? What do we do? How do we help change our eyes and see what's going on and how we can make a change in the world outside our doors and inside our doors?
Consult our black leaders.
I'm sorry?
Who are our black leaders in our church? What are they telling us to do?
Black leaders
Yeah,
in our church?
or in the Methodist
It's an
church.
organization, yeah.
Because you know, as an ally, we're not leading this charge. They need to tell us how best, because they see the problems worse than we. I mean, they live it. You know, we have friends. They live it. And
We have an excellent black man who is the new leader of diversity in this conference.
what are they saying to do? Get them out here. What do they want from us? And do it.
I think we should put our money where our mouth is.
Always good.
I also think we need to come out of the closet in some of the ways that we've come out of the closet on other issues. About the fact that we have black leaders and especially women leaders, but the top bishops in the United Methodist Church that are black or female or now gay, lesbian and gay, that are a part, that we are a church, we are a congregation of the of the United Methodist Church. We are not a church unto ourselves. We're part. South Carolina Conference has more black people, and higher percentage of black people in it than any other conference in the United States. So one thing we need to do is to celebrate publicly who we are.
This work is intersectional too. I mean, it's not mutually exclusive when you think about LGBTQ inclusion, when you think about women in the pulpit and women's rights and things of that nature. I mean, there are some small reasons to celebrate, but there's still a lot of progress. It wasn't until this year, this very year, 2023, that a Native American bishop in the United Methodist Church laid hands on another Native American to consecrate that person as a bishop in the United Methodist Church. And how long have Native Americans been part of this land that we sit on and that we live on, that we haven't seen past Native American bishops to be able to consecrate another Native American bishop? How often does an African American bishop get to consecrate another African American bishop? And that's in the representation that churches just like ours, or in our context, we get to send one delegate from Mars Hill and Bright Hope Laurel to annual conference, and the people in annual conference getting to vote for those who go to jurisdictional conferences to elect bishops. And so it starts at the local church in terms of that representation that you seek as part of that and that organizing. And I'm going to shut up.
Amen.
But I believe what Jennifer said is the key. Let them come to us. Let them tell us how we can help with this. We can come up, brainstorm all kind of ideas, but we need to visibly show that we have leaders that are of a different ethnicity and say to them, how can we help make a difference?
Can we not find a black pastor who could fill our pulpit one Sunday when we haven't?
We have.
Absolutely
We have.
have.
Well,
We have.
Just one time.
We
I
have.
don't remember.
The other thing is, one good example of us doing good, this exactly what you're talking about, was when the equity leader at Mars Hill, who is also a black pastor in our community, asked us, and Paula was the one through which this came, to help with when the cemetery, the historic black cemetery, was vandalized, to help them restore and protect that. And so we and several other churches, white churches, almost all white churches, banded together to support that. So we have begun, not for where we need to be, but we have begun that practice of listening and responding.
Thanks to Paula for bringing it to the attention of the Methodist women. We really went after that. We realized that needed to be done, and we sent a sizable check from our organization to support that cemetery situation, and they were most appreciative.
But we still, I love it. We still sit here and talk about white churches and black churches and the Methodist church.
Yeah.
But when I was in South Carolina, I was seeing more. Our superintendent where I was she was a woman, and she really did strive to bring can't think of
Versatility.
versatility into the churches in that area, not only due to race, but also to sexual preferences and to other women and things like that. So we saw much more diversity than I'm seeing here.
Well, let's face it, would you feel comfortable if you were a black person coming into a church where you see only white faces. And we need somehow to seed our congregation, to have black cutouts. No, but we need to have more diversity in our congregation.
Yes.
Maybe we could do something with the black students at Morris Hill.
The
Maybe.
Black students at Mars Hill.
Maybe.
The
I
young
don't know.
man who
It
was
depends.
coming regularly, I was
Clement was
surprised
coming.
he kept coming and
But-
coming, but we welcomed him, you know.
But he didn't feel at home for some reason.
How could he? I mean, what do they need from
Right.
us?
It's something that we haven't discovered
We have
yet.
to listen.
I think one of the things that we'd have to change a lot to be racially diverse is the style of worship.
Is what the
The
style.
style of worship.
Yeah.
You know, the black church worships very different than
Yes,
we do
they
here.
do.
So if we really, really want to have a diverse congregation, addressing the style of worship, and that's really hard to do.
I
But
just
it
know
doesn't have
the
to be
words to the hymns I don't sing. I'm sorry.
I mean, just clapping, for example. I mean, yeah,
Amen.
yeah. I mean, that's
Agreeing.
yeah, it's just our culture is very different,
Yeah.
and worship culture.
Yeah, and do you know whether
But I
or not
did
the
just mouth
Methodist churches in Asheville integrated? What's the story on
I think they are somewhat
that? Sparsely.
but,
But
require,
probably they have a more middle class population of blacks from which to draw
Yeah.
people to come.
But we don't have many that live here.
Oh,
The
we
first
live
one.
there.
Well, a lot of
looking,
people are moving in.
Right,
What are the
and there are gonna be
demographics?
more and more moving in.
What are the demographics of the people who are moving in?
It's mainly white.
Of course,
but
nobody else can afford
A
housing.
small increase, small increase.
we have to be aware, we have to be looking, we have to invite, we have to recruit for the choir or wherever,
Listen,
the UNW.
And listen,
listen.
Well, I do think we're trying. I think this church is truly trying. We're not turning a blind eye to the problem. It's
No,
just that we live in an area where there are not many to invite,
Especially
to
Baptist,
ask
you know,
to tell me
like-
what we can
Our little
do.
black church is Baptist, you know,
Yeah,
and they like to have their own little.
and like Paula was saying, they have their own style of worshiping. If we all of a sudden, now this is just me talking, but if we all of a sudden changed and tried to worship like that, I think it would be just as uncomfortable for us. A few things, maybe, but I'm not accustomed to worshiping in that style.
but we can learn new tricks.
It may
Well,
be
that's-
something to propose to Joel that with his students that he has paid to come here and work, that perhaps he could recruit.
And that would be
Well,
comfortable.
we had Kelsey a few years ago.
Yeah.
Kelsey
Maybe they
graduated and married, and she was on the SART board until she's taken a little break right now because of some issues at home. But I met her because Joel had recruited her, and she was in our choir, and just a lovely young black woman.
And she came to her Sunday school class some, didn't she?
I don't think
She
Kelsey.
heavy set.
Yeah. Did
Yeah,
she come?
She came some.
Okay,
We
okay.
were laughing about something.
And we're talking about recruiting someone to do a type of internship to find out more about the population in this area, maybe the demographics. We've been talking about that and offering some type of stipend for that. And perhaps we should look at doing more diversity.
Who's talking about this?
Pardon?
Who's talking about this?
Was it the United Methodist Women? I'm not sure who started that.
I don't think it was United Methodist
maybe
Women.
it was the council. I don't know.
I don't know. It's something that Paula would be able to tell us about. It may be something that she knows about.
Maybe it's the
Because-
class.
Hmm?
Maybe it's the class that she does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it may be.
Yeah, I have not heard of that.
Sacred ground, might
Right.
Maybe
Would
it
you
was
ask her
sacred
about
ground.
that?
Sure. I also have something else, and I'm just going to throw this out for you. We have so many people with so much talent in this church. And I was reading Richard Rohr this week about the importance of art and how it can bring a community together and make connections. And I thought, how fun would it be to have an art festival where we introduce people to art classes or to music classes or to different types of things in this church and have those things. Some of them are already available. But to have an art festival where we do painting, where we do gardening, where we do, music.
A
Lots
mural.
of things. And readings, storytelling. Yeah.
And make sure that the leaders of these things are concerned about being inclusive in terms of race.
Sure.
You know.
I don't think that would be a problem in this
I don't
day.
either, but sometimes we
Art is
need to
really-
say it, we don't think about it.
Really powerful.
Yeah. Well,
I think that could happen.
some things that we do unintentionally.
Sure.
I had a really wonderful young woman I worked with in South Carolina who was black, and I know I've mentioned it to y'all before. She wrote a little book about growing up black, and it's 'Cause I'm Me. Emily, you would really enjoy that book. But it's just a little thin book. It will, yes, I will lend it
Are
to you.
you willing to continue this discussion next week?
Yeah, if you'll help.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's do that.
Okay.
Let's do it. Because I think we've made progress just talking.
Yeah, and one nice point that Joanne made to me was about, or I got from her, was about the black medical student. Does he feel included? You think about so many different ways that people are excluded when they're even making attempts at bettering, if you want to call it that, contributing to society, which I think of whatever.
And this is going to come as a surprise to some of you, but when Keith graduated from Mars Hill College in 1988, and then he was applying to get into med school, at that time, the late 80s, early 90s, if you had a little blood
Drop
from,
of blood.
you had a better chance of getting in. Now that, I know a lot of
You
people,
could check a box.
yeah, like Indian, black, any
Anybody could check a
ethnicity,
box.
but that would check a box, yeah. And he
Oh,
said,
woman.
Mom, do we have anything? And I said, no, it's all European stuff, and so we can't check that box, so he just had to get in on his own. But if there were two candidates for a position to get into med school, and one maybe had a little Afro-American or Indian, they got in over the white.
So who's willing to work on next week's lesson or help us work on it or whatever? I'm willing to do whatever.
I'm kind of new here, but I'll help.
Great.
Great, Julie is a good.
Oh, and I've been calling you Jennifer. I am so
Don't worry
sorry.
about it.
Oh, Julie, forgive
Julie,
me.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, Julie,
It's a
Jessica.
J.
J.
It's a J.
As long as
J.
you
Well, I did
Jennifer.
remember the J, but I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry,
Jenica.
Julie.
It's all good.
So you can provide the Methodist stance, whatever the Methodist stance is evolving into, and you can provide what is the reality here, what you've seen. Yeah,
I need phone numbers and stuff so we can email.
very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because during my sabbatical, I studied sickle cell disease, which primarily affects African Americans. So I've seen it all, from a medical, legal, you name it, and
Not wonderful, but wonderful.
So you can describe the fact that they have less medical care available, less
how they're
money to
used for entertainment, used for athleticism. Their labor is not valued. You know, I got a lot to talk about.
Oh, good.
Wonderful.
And I'm sorry for interrupting you because you do have a lot to talk about.
Yes, yes, yes.
Julie, would you be the leader and we'll help?
Sure.
Okay, and I need to get her phone number or email or something.
And y'all, I remember when my mother called me and said, I got Viola to sit down and have lunch with me.
That was a real part.
Y'all, I would have loved to have been a mosquito on the seat looking at that. I mean, that was not too many years before my mother died.
And they broke the barriers and they loved it.
Broke the barriers and they loved it. She kept telling, she said, Viola, you have to eat with me. This makes no sense. We eat the same thing and I eat first and Viola said, but I can't, Miss Mildred, I can't. And she said, well, why can't you? Nobody's gonna see us. We're friends. Let's sit here together.
That's
And
how
it-
it went.
And it worked. And she sat down with Mama.
How are you, Margaret?
Good, how are you?
All right.
They're still practicing.
Have you ever read the book? Okay. The Amazing Lives of Henrietta Lacks?
I have that book on the table.
Okay, I read it. I have read it. I didn't notice it, but I have read it.
That's where Gila sells.
Yes, and that is, and the thing about it, in the end of it, when you realize her family still could not afford the health care that was beneficial because of her sales.
We had students who were earning extra credit in our classes if they read that book.
Well, I was I was subbing in a biology teacher's class, and he mentioned it, and it just perked my interest. And I noticed later that he had some of those books in his classroom, and I said, could I read one of your books? And he said, yes. Then my friend Nancy, when I talked to her about it, she wanted to read it.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
just
an excellent book.
Would you send me that?
Title?
I can't find the pencil.
Okay, I will.
Or
I will.
write it on
I
a
will.
bulletin.
I will.
Maybe writing it on a
Is
bulletin.
it The Amazing Life of Henrietta Lacks?
Yeah.
The Amazing Life of Henrietta. I will. I'll email it to you.
There's
Okay.
not, she's not the only example of that either.
Oh,
But that is a good example.
yes. So there was more than one person that had
Because
the healing.